Hi, Smart News. Hope you're off to a great morning. We have three quick stories that I think are worth your time to have on your radar today. Before I get to that, just a quick personal reflection. I was gone for a couple days. I was still working, but I was off of the regular routine. And I know that's something that's been very hard for us all to do over the last 2 years. But it gave me some really important perspective, and always a little distance does that. One of the things that we want as people and as journalists is we want to know how the story turns out. But the reality is, in our own lives and in news stories, the stories develop on their own timeline. And it's really important to remember that as a journalist and as a person. And I got a good dose of that over the last several days. And it made me recenter what our priority is and reminds me of our priority at Smarter News, which is quick, concise, nonpartisan news. What's really important at a time like this, when the story can go in a lot of different directions, and I'm talking about the pandemic at this point, and it's felt like that over the last 2 years, that we're at very critical intersections and junctures. It's really important to take stake in where we are rather than try to predict the future. And that's something I want to talk about today. So let's just take stake in where we're at. One of the things that we're taking a look at this point, and why it's important at this point of the year, is that we're really going into flu season. We know this is a time of year where respiratory infections take off. And I want to just draw your attention to the weekly tracker that we get from the CDC. We know that there's been massive declines in positivity rates and cases and hospitalizations, and we're seeing that a lot of different places around the country. I just want to draw your attention to this graph, though. We don't really know the reason for that decline. Is it just part of the cycle of the virus? The virus kind of cycles up, the New York Times was talking about, every 2 to 3 months. Is it because we're seeing gains of natural immunity or gains of immunity because of the vaccine? What is it? We don't really know. And will we see a surge in January like we did last year, where you see that huge spike go up? So where we're at right now, though, in the far right of your screen shows this decline. Where we're going, though, we just don't know. One of the headlines you're going to hear a lot about over the next several days, and quite frankly, over the next several weeks, is about these vaccines being given emergency use authorization for use in much younger children. We do not have that yet. The meeting is at the end of the month, but what you will see today are headlines about the White House coming with a plan on how to administer these vaccines, so preparation for that. While that's happening, I want you aware of another different story, which is that the CDC has been running some studies with different school districts around the country. And what they're basically called is test to stay. So instead of having huge quarantines, let's say a 5th grade class, someone gets COVID and the whole class has to quarantine. What they're doing is, if you don't have any symptoms and you want to bring your child in and get tested, even with that exposure, that close exposure, you can do so. If the child tests negative, they go to school for the day. Guess what? The next day they do the same. They come back, they get tested, no symptoms, they're negative, they go to class. What the studies are showing from these limited school districts is that they actually are seeing the same positivity rate as they would in quarantines, that 2 to 3% of the kids are testing positive at some points, but they're not having to quarantine the entire class, which means the parents aren't being disrupted for their work schedules. And so it's another option. So while we're getting a lot of news about potentially vaccine mandates in schools, the approval of this vaccine for emergency use authorization for kindergartners, for example, I also want you aware that this is happening and school districts are choosing this as well. So you have two different stories sort of percolating and developing at the same time. Why is it important to watch what's happening at the schools? Because it could also be a model for work. And as you're watching these vaccines develop, the vaccine mandates develop, perhaps that's a testing strategy that's also being considered by the CDC. And what the CDC said is they're looking at is perhaps as part of their recommendations. So I want you aware of that. Second story you should be aware of today has to do with what's happening in Russia, or who Russia is meeting with today. So there's a big meeting happening in Russia. You have India, Pakistan, China. You also have representatives from the Taliban. What is the meeting about? It's actually about the future of Afghanistan. And I want to show you my Vanna White moments that I do enjoy over at the Globe, because it really does give us some good geography here. Here's Russia all the way up here. You have China, you have Iran, you have Pakistan, you have India. You have all of these countries that could be really affected about what happens in this particular part of the world. You want to know what else Russia's doing? They're holding some military drills right here on the border. And what is Russia attempting to do? What is their concern? What's interesting is that even though Russia and the United States, we have so many differences, right? We actually share something when it comes to Afghanistan. Russia does not want to see Afghanistan to be an exporter of terror. They don't want to see that. They want stability in the region. Obviously, they have a history of war with Afghanistan. in the past. And one of the big questions that has emerged with the United States withdrawal is who actually steps up as a geopolitical power right there, and who is a force to make sure, in different ways, make sure or watch security in the region when it comes to whether these terrorism groups will bloom once again and use Afghanistan as a launching pad. That could be something that we have to watch, not just in the immediate, but in the next several years. So that's happening, also important. Final study thing I want to tell you about, and this is sort of a separate study, goes back to this idea of, hey, we could be in a place where it's a little bit scary to think about the future, but we also could be at a place where we could be watching the dawn of a new era when it comes to healthcare. And separately from the coronavirus, there's this brand new study out on metabolism. Now, I don't know about you, but as I've gotten older, I've said to myself, well, I'm feeling this way, because my metabolism has slowed down because I'm getting older, and that's what happens. Well, it turns out a brand new study says that's actually not the case, that you may have the same metabolism rate at 45 as you do at 25. I know. You want to know who has the best metabolism rate out of anybody? Like infants, like 3-month-olds. Their metabolism is like amazing. And after you turn 1, your metabolism starts to decrease a little bit each year to about 20. And then you maintain the same rate from 20 to 60, or it starts to decline again. Now, this is challenging everything we know about metabolism and all of our excuses, right? Because metabolism is sort of out of your control. But these researchers are saying, listen, there could be all sorts of things that change in your body as you age, but metabolism may not be one of them. It may not be what we thought of. So when you next see a baby in a stroller, you should look at that baby and say, major metabolism. And when you look at yourself and you think, man, I've kind of gained a couple pounds, but my metabolism has probably slowed down. The researchers say, not necessarily the case. In fact, not the case at all. Same rate. Can you imagine? Same rate at 50 as you do at 30. That's what they say. You take away the variables. What do you think about that? Interesting times. Just a couple things I think you should know today. Questions and comments, let me know. And as always, more on smarternews.com. Have a bunch of news stories on there today and more stories to come this week. I've missed you guys. Thank you again for all your support, and I'll see you with more on smarternews.com.